What we saw at this speech, we saw signs being waved, we saw canes being shaken, we saw outbursts, and I thought, first of all, would this have happened during a State of the Union address? Because this was a joint session, but it wasn't a State of the Union specifically. So I wonder if there's this mindset that this was different. Mm-hmm. Then the other thing I wonder is how much of this played right into Trump's hands. Yeah, I mean, he's the ringleader of the circus, and now you're performing like the circus animals. That may be what he wanted.
That "you lie" moment years ago, that was at a State of the Union, wasn't
it?
When somebody screamed out, "You lie!"
Yes.
And,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So joining us in the studio right now is Matt Grodzki, who's a Democratic strategist in the Valley here. Matt, good to have you in. We talked with Stan Barnes yesterday, who is more of a right-leaning strategist. So we wanted to get the other side of this. When you saw the speech on Tuesday night and you saw Al Green waving the cane and whatnot, I mean, what is your thought, just strategically speaking? Like good move, bad move, showing resistance or lack of decorum. How does that play behind the scenes?
No, first of all, thanks for having me. I think 30,000-foot view, not the right move, and there's a few reasons why for that, right? So I think for Democrats in super blue districts, they are under a lot of pressure from their constituents to show some sort of a pulse that they're standing up to this stuff and that they're quote-unquote resisting, okay? So I understand the pressures that they're under there. But I think where the Democratic Party as a whole needs to be better on things like this is a uniformed response, right? So you can do that in a number of ways. So if the strategy going into this was, hey, we're going to be rowdy and we're going to resist, okay, fine. But then what needed to happen was when Al got thrown out of the room, that's when everybody else needed to have their "I'm Spartacus, oh captain, my captain" moment, and they needed to stand up too, and they needed to get ushered out and make this a show. Okay, if you're not going to do that route, then maybe you're counter-programming. So maybe nobody goes, right? Maybe you're protesting that way. Maybe you are going and you're going to be, respectful, but maybe you're wearing all black and you're not standing, right? There's other things you can do strategically to show that you're adverse to this without falling into the trap of being, just irresponsible and playing into the hands of the right, which he was taunting them the entire time to do. So I think that's the miss. But I think our biggest problem is we're not in lockstep, which, to the right's credit, they're always in lockstep, and we seem to constantly have this problem. I don't think the auction paddleboards were going to work well for TV, and that kind of is an unfortunate miss for us.
So, where does the blame fall? Is this a Hakeem Jeffries issue? Is this a Chuck Schumer thing? I mean, is this a DNC behind the scenes? Who's not getting everybody on board here?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure who should be the one, whipping everybody in the right direction here. I will say, and maybe this answers your question, back in 2018, when we had Pelosi kind of running the ship, she was the de facto leader for a lot of these responses.
Right.
And she kept everybody in line. And for a long time, we were very disciplined in how we were messaging. We took our cues, not just at the federal level, but at the state party level with how we were responding to things locally, nationally. And that worked to our benefit because we made great gains in 2018, obviously in 20, and that carried over into 22. You have to be disciplined. You have to all be rowing in the same direction. And this choose-your-own-adventure resistance is not a good plan for the long term.
Matt Grodzki, Democratic strategist, joins us in studio right now, and we appreciate him coming down here. You mentioned there were 3 different options. You had a couple different buckets that the Democrats could have taken. Which one would you have taken if you had to just pick one of those? How would you have had them handle it on Tuesday night?
I would have opted for you all attend. Maybe you all wear a collective color of some sort of resistance.
I heard a lot of them are wearing pink.
Yeah, that I wouldn't do that. I mean, I get the sentiment behind it. But look, here's the broad thing that we're playing for, right? We're trying to get back the swing voters that turned the election in Trump's favor last time around. By and large, those people made an economic decision. They wanted prices to come down. They didn't want to feel the pinch in their pocketbooks. Most of those voters make their decisions based on what party they see as more reasonable, right? So we need to be seen as the reasonable party. Now, you can't normalize some of the terrible behavior, the terrible decisions that this administration is doing. So I understand that, but there's ways to protest that without being seen as obstructionist or pissing people off in the middle, right? So I think all go there. Maybe you don't stand. Maybe you're all collectively wearing black. Maybe I liked how they all got out at the end and rushed out, right? That part's fine. But I think the biggest takeaway is you need to all be doing the same thing because otherwise you just look disjointed.
Chris and I had this debate the other day, and I'd love your perspective on it real quick, Matt. Is it about getting more Democrats into the Democratic bucket? Or do the Democrats need to try to appeal to more moderates out there? If it was just one of those two approaches in terms of appealing to where the country's at right now, which one of those do you think is the bigger deal?
Sure. Well, I come back to this to answer your question. All politics is local, right? So in a battleground state like Arizona, our strategy needs to be to get more Democrats in, right? Because we have a voter registration disadvantage. Well, ironically, the way to do that is to show people that are in the middle that we are more reasonable. Come join our party because we're the party of common sense. And I think that that can transcend across the country, that we need to be seen as the ones who have the vision for America. We're the ones pushing American values. So I think to answer your question, yeah, it's about getting more Democrats in the fold, but you do that by persuading people in the middle. And then that starts with messaging. And what you decide to say in a joint session or after, it's very consequential.
Matt Grodzki is a Democratic strategist as we talk about the Democratic response and what the Republicans are going to have to guard against going forward. And I want to make sure that we're presenting the different perspectives. We had Stan Barnes on yesterday. And Matt, everything you're saying to me makes sense. In my mind, that's exactly that's how I would advise it too. That said, the Republicans were in a similar situation a decade ago. And you had people that they were not happy with the establishment. They didn't like the way that it worked. And then you had this guy come along who started saying wild things. And people went, he's too far out. He's too unreasonable. He pulled off a shocker. Mm-hmm. Even during the first term of Trump, you had the Never Trumpers. You had the Ron Flipkowskis. You had the Lincoln, what are they? The Lincoln Project, right? You had all these other groups. And they were going to resist. This was kind of the Romney Republicans. They've fallen to the wayside. It seemed that the more outrageous Trump got, the more popular he got, the more he brought people in. Yeah. So are the Democrats at this point where they're saying, do we follow Grodzki's advice? Do we try to seem reasonable? We're the party of the middle ground? Or, I mean, for Pete's sake, it seems to be working really well for the Republicans to say, we're going to double down on being further out.
Yeah, totally understand the conundrum. It only works for him. Right. It doesn't work for Kerry Lake. It doesn't work for any other type of candidate. We need a longer show to get back into the dynamics of 2016. But I think, Clinton wasn't popular with the middle of the road voter. Right. Yeah. I do think there are strong elements of misogyny that, that transcends 2016 and the 2024 election, because you had 2020 with Biden. Right. Two men. One who appealed more, I think, to that folksy, rural, working class voter. That Biden built a lifetime cultivating those types of relationships and that appeal. So I think that is a reason why, one of the very many reasons why Trump lost in 20. But yeah, I think that what you have to do, as much as you want to kind of get on the Trump train and kind of replicate what he's doing, I think you have to follow the Slotkin approach, right? Which is what the response was from the senator after the address. And I think she hit on an economic message, a reasonable message, and I think that message long-term is what's going to pull more people in and make us successful.
It doesn't get the headlines, though.
Well, it's hard to get the headlines when the guy's had the longest speech in American history and everybody's asleep. But eventually I think it will, because people are going to look for that alternative when they're hurting in their pocketbooks again. You've got these tariffs that are coming down. Who knows what our standing is going to be on the world stage, depending on how we pan out with Ukraine.
So that's really interesting that you say that, because I think that's going to have, to tie back to something else you said, is that all politics are local. I think that all ties together. In studio with us right now is a Democratic strategist, Matt Grodzki. We wanted to have his take on what we saw after the president's speech on Tuesday. Yesterday we had right-leaning strategist Stan Barnes on with us, and so we wanted to get the left-leaning side of that. But I was talking with Mike Broomhead this morning, and he raised a question with me, and he says, is Hobbs going to have a primary challenger? And I said, boy, I don't think so. And I said, who would it be? He said, Fontes. And I said, I don't think Fontes would do that. I said, I think if anybody were to challenge here, it would be Chris Mays. We know that there's been a little bit of strife between the two of them behind the scenes. I want to get your thoughts on that. Is there anybody in the Democratic Party that wants to throw a legitimate challenge at the governor moving forward?
No, I don't think that's going to happen. I think that our executive leaders are going to be staying in their current roles, running for re-election in their current roles. And she has a significant war chest, right? I mean, I think if someone wanted to mount a serious challenge, they'd have to have serious money, and nobody has that. But I don't think there's any interest inside the Democratic Party apparatus to challenge the governor. I think we need to re-elect our executive branch. I think that the party understands that. I think voters understand that. And I think the elected officials understand that, and that's where their focus is.
What do you say to people that say, Hobbs is not a strong candidate. She's not a strong governor. She got elected because Lake was such a bad candidate. If she's not facing Lake this time around, then whoever is running against her is going to win by a landslide.
Well, I've heard a lot of that from people, and what frustrates me, and I think that this is where the onus comes back to the Democratic Party, our various elected officials, and our surrogates, is we need to do a better job of telling the story of the wins of our elected leaders, including the governor, right? So I've heard numerous times over and over again, oh, she's weak on immigration. Well, she's not, right? She's allocated $100 million to border security, $17 million towards, I believe it's called the SAFE Task Force, which I think back in 2024, I think it was 8 million fentanyl pills they stopped from reaching communities. So those types of things, Democrats are generally adverse to talking about the border because, it's a boogeyman topic and, oh, no, we don't want to get pinned down on it. We got to talk about these things because we are doing a good job on it. Our leaders are going there and getting the work done. But if we don't talk about their wins, the other narrative prevails, and that's how we get into these problems.
Talking with Democratic strategist Matt Grodzki right now. I want to go back to Chris's question for a second because I agree with what you said. I don't think Governor Hobbs will get primaried. What would it take, though? Could her poll numbers look bad enough that would require
a hypothetical
like
universe
or someone else to get
fun.
in?
Yeah, I mean, I think for any leader, your poll numbers have to fall drastically.
Is there anything other than poll numbers that could do it?
Lack of financial resources, but
you said she's got a strong war chest.
I think the right would love to stir that up. I think that's where a lot of the talking points come from because they want to see that type of drama. But it's just not realistic. That's not a thing that's happening.
So I was interested in this. Matt Grodzki, Democratic strategist, joining us right now. AZ Central had the story. The Democrats are already lining up to take on Schweikert 2026. Man, it feels like we just got through election season, and now we're already ramping things up again. But there have been people that have already announced, right?
Yes.
So is this race the hottest race in the country? As some people are saying, like this is the tightest race we're going to see nationwide?
It could be one of them. Here's my issue, and it's ultimately the Democrats' issue. We had a 6-way primary last time.
Yeah.
That meant that Shaw, who had probably the broadest swath of support, having been a former elected official at the state level, he got through. Right.
Yeah.
But he didn't live in the district. He didn't run a general election campaign that took on Schweikert hard enough, in my opinion. And at the same time, you had voter registration for Dems fall between 2022, when our guy lost by 1 point that year, and 2024. So Republicans added some 11,000 voters to CD1. We added close to 1,300. Okay, so that's not great.
Wow.
So one, if we want to have a strong candidate to beat Schweikert in what I hope is a backlash here against Trump, you got to have a small field, right, so that the right candidate wins and that they've got the resources to compete in a very short 3 months general election window. They got to campaign the right way in that general election, and you have to have the voters that can get them elected. Because if that independent swath gets bigger and bigger, it's harder and harder to win that seat.
It feels like, and I live in CD1, and
me too.
The last, it's been the last 3 or 4 elections that race with Schweikert has always been looked at as, oh, this is an opportunity to flip a seat.
Yep.
What does it take for somebody who's not in Congress right now to win a seat as an outsider? When you're competing against somebody who's Schweikert, who's been there how many terms now, how do you overcome that advantage of presumably war chest and the fact that he's been there?
Yeah.
What do you do as a Democrat to have to win that seat?
Well, you got to run someone that lives in the district. You got to run somebody that understands the main issues in the district. This is why, we worked with Connor O'Callaghan last time around, because we felt that he fit that mold the best. But ultimately, you have to have a candidate that can attack Schweikert the right way.
How do you keep the numbers down as a Democrat and make sure it doesn't become a 6-way race, too? Like you mentioned, it was 5 and 6 ways.
That's where we have broader issues to work out as a party. I think, and I've lectured folks at LD meetings about this, is it ultimately comes down to the constituents and the people at the meetings and the primary voters. They've got to be the ones who got to be less focused on pleasing everybody and making sure everybody's feelings are okay, and finally saying, look, we got to be pragmatic about this. Your intentions are in the right place. Thank you for wanting to get involved in public service. Go run for Board of Soups, right? Go run for a school board seat. Wait your turn for a couple of years. We need to keep this field clear so that we're not distracting ourselves, so that we are building a war chest, so that we can have the right candidate. So I think that conversation hasn't happened enough. We'll see if it happens this time around.
Well, you got to make sure that whoever you're talking to isn't recording it, because we saw that happen with Carrie Lake and Jeff DeWitt. And coming to find out, she had a tape recorder going, and then she outed him as being a horrible person for that.
It's a bummer when that happens.
I know from the Democratic side, you are really put off by that, weren't you? Matt Grodzki, Democratic strategist. Been a pleasure having you in here. Thank you so much for talking to us about the ins and outs of not only what's going on locally, but nationally, and the little bit of disarray that we're seeing there, and where leadership needs to refocus some things. So we appreciate you being in here, Matt.
Thanks for watching The Chris and Joe Show. Click to see more from Chris and Joe, and tap the button in the middle to subscribe to KTAR News.